That is the oldest church in Cologne, Romanesque. It's quite pretty. Just cranked up the gangplank. Got any last thoughts about Cologne before we go home? It was lovely. From the edge here. Farewell, Cologne. If you look at that gate and check out the steps where the water usually is, that is where the water usually comes up to. And it ain't there.
I don't know what's going on, but there's
if we did, won't be as big a deal as it was.
on our walk before we got to.
a whole big open sea. And when the Dutch started to make settlements in this area, they had quite some challenges here, because this was all former swamp area. Therefore they had to build dams and dikes, and that's the reason why we are here still living in a city named after the first settlement, a dam literally built in the only natural waterway, the river Amstel. So Amsterdam used to be the official name, and which later changed into Amsterdam. So to the right hand side was the way in and out, the only reachable way to reach the North Sea. And as you probably know, around the Zuiderzee. That's why we constantly had problems with floodings here. And that's why when they built settlements, they built it on dams. That's where a lot of names are named after dam. Think about Rotterdam, Zaandam, Edam, Amsterdam, all named after the first settlements. And in 1306 already Amsterdam became city rights, and that meant we were tolerated to start merchandising and sell our products here from our market areas. In those days we didn't trade cheese or flowers yet. That wasn't started till the beginning of the 17th century, but we were already trading in two important products. Any idea what that can be? It was fish. And the Dutch are travelers, and especially from are all coming over to one of the biggest sea harbors in the world, Rotterdam. You've heard of that. That is where most of them coming. To the right, new attractions for dear guests. So later on, you can take one of these free transportations, like these ferry boats, that cross over to the northern side. So this is the water that splits Amsterdam nowadays in two areas. And you see that white-shaped building, which is the beautiful film museum with an excellent restaurant in there. Right next to it, you see a round building with the name This is Holland on there. That is where you can do a vertical flight over our country. So you're sitting down, and then it's shown like a three-dimensional movie, and you give a flight over our country. And then we have another spectacular new attraction right next to the big high building where you can see the free. In the north, practically people lived in townships, and up till 1921 they lived completely independent, not under the rules of Amsterdam. That's why you still find a lot of the timber houses and a whole different area on the north. Well, here we're passing the islands. Close by is where we picked you up this morning from your Avalon ship. Also here a whole new constructions going on, and you can imagine that for a long time that was not possible to start building so close into this water that was standing in an open connection with the Zuiderzee. And therefore the Dutch started to not only protect themselves with that dike, finally after the last horrible floodings, and these were just over 100 years ago, in 1916, imagine our whole northern province of our country has been standing 2.5 up to 3 meters underwater, so almost 5.5 feet. Everything flooded into this load of our city. Amsterdam grew out in those days not only by being a more and more populated city, but we're starting to do more and more trading from here. So a lot of international traders also wanted to settle down here. But the Dutch, as practically and Calvinistic as we were in those days, for us life just had to be practical, simple. Live your life in modesty. We didn't have eye for big sculptures like you saw in Germany, in France and in Belgium starting off. For Dutch, things just had to be practical. So these wealthy people didn't want to be house-vested in these smaller sized, tiny little fishermen and farmers' houses that we only had here. And that's the reason why Amsterdam has started a plan to enlarge Amsterdam with this canal district, where the land was sold to the wealthy merchants so they could build their bigger sized patrician houses along it. And right next to it, and now we have to be careful with the swan that she doesn't get oppressive now. Now we have a lady company right next to us here. Yeah. She made it, yeah. Oh, the captain is just saying he had it once she flew inside of the boat. And, okay, well, she better behaves today, right? Yeah. So first have a look here to our right-hand side. This canal was dug out as the last canal. If you look on a map, it's the outside circle. And this was used as a transportation canal. Look to your right, all these warehouse complexes. And you recognize them with these beautiful shutters in front of the windows. These were all used as storage houses. So when the products were brought over from the tall ships into these flat bottom boats, these transportation barges, they were brought over to the warehouse complexes in storage, and from there exported into other places. So this is how they normally used to look like. And then, of course, the Industrial Revolution started to take over a lot of the old Dutch traditional functions. The same for the houseboats. So in the 60s, we had an overload of these barges that we hardly used for the transportation any longer. And more was carried over the roads or by trains. And Amsterdam always had a lack of housing. So therefore we tolerated people to start living on these boats without paying taxes. So it was a free way of living, and that became so popular that then we had all these American pot-smoking hippies coming over that founded it a nice free way of living here. And then it became very popular. But you can imagine what happens. These boats were not designed to live on. There was no fresh water, no electricity, there was no gas, there was no sewage. So you can imagine they pumped their daily dirt straight into these waters of Amsterdam. So in the 80s, this really became a very unhygienic situation here. First here on the right, you can see one of the older ones. They still carry the lee boards on the side. That is typical design because of the flat bottom boats. Could not be built with a keel underneath of the ship. Therefore, we build them on the rear side. And then they need these lee boards to flap out, to stabilize, get out of the drift, and also to use them as braking systems. Here's the Northern Church, one of the 4 churches that were built here in the beginning of the 17th century. And that mainly had to do, imagine our population grew out from less than 90,000 people to over 220,000 people within 90 years' time. There was an enormous growth as we needed workers and we wanted to attract the wealthy merchants. So to housefest all these workers, rapidly this right district, which we now know as one of the most expensive and trendy areas of our city, the Jordan area, the Jordan district. And this was set up just to housefest the workers. The plan was, after the 70, 80 years, when we finish up the canals, we steer these workers away from here and we can start using the land for other purpose. But people settled down here. They had their family lives, their factories opened up, so nobody wanted to move away from here. And now 400 years later, this became the most trendy area. So what started off as the worker district is now a very arty part. So the houseboats now are very comfortable, and these are not for free anymore. Actually, these changed in being the most expensive ways of living nowadays. The reason for that is that Amsterdam started to connect these boats to our underground facilities. Everything goes underground: electricity, water, internet, sewage. So you can see pipelines running from the sides of these boats that they are connected to our underground facilities. So once they were connected, they could not move around anymore. So they were giving a fixed location. They pay tax for the location, like the house owners do, and taxes like the normal house owners do to use the facilities of Amsterdam. So they pay the double taxes nowadays, and Amsterdam limited the amount of houseboats into 2,500 500 houseboat locations. And that means when nowadays a houseboat comes for sale, well, bring in at least €1,000,000 before you start putting your biddings in, because hardly under 600,000–700,000 euros you won't find a houseboat nowadays. 3 weeks ago, a bigger sized one was sold for 1.7 million. Imagine that. And then you still live on a sinking ship. How about that? So that is one of the more expensive ways, and the reason why they became so popular is just the location. And once you have the location, you can take out the old barge like you've seen on the way. Some are set up on concrete blocks nowadays, and they build up 2 or 3 layers even on top of it. So some of these houseboats are now set up in 3 different floors. So we're reaching towards another beautiful church, and when those that looking forward can already see it, otherwise you will see it when we pass along. This church carries the highest church tower in Amsterdam center, and this is the Wester Church. Well, as practically as we are, we had one church, which was in the early days Catholic, because it was founded by a Catholic group of fishermen. Then they built a second church that was in the time of the Reformation, that became Protestant. We had to give them names, so we said the Oude Kerk and the Nieuwe Kerk, the old and the new. And in the 17th century we built 4. One in the north, one in the east, one in the south, one in the west. The north, the east, the south, and the Wester Church. And the Wester Church is famous. Has anybody been reading the diary of Anne Frank? Well, look here, we're passing the house, the front part of the house where she has been in hiding. That's the house where you see these people standing in front of it. House number 263 with the darker green facade. Literally where this family is standing right in front. That was where they had the shop, the store, and where the father Otto Frank also practiced his job in the early day. And through the house, you entered into the house which was hidden behind the main house. That's why in Dutch we call the diary het achterhuis van Anne Frank. Achter literally means behind or at the rear side. So the house hidden behind the main house. Anne Frank, together with her sister, father, mother, and the Pels family, 7 people have been there in hiding. And unfortunately, like a lot of other Jewish people, just before the end of the war, they've been deported out of the city, and from these 7 people, only 1 person came back. That was Father Otto Frank. He's been handed back the diary from his daughter, and that is why he decided to translate it worldwide. Now you can read about one of the personal stories of a little girl with big dreams during the war that didn't survive it. And she was... The hours of the house now, from 9 to 7, but you have to have time slot tickets far ahead of time, 2–3 months ahead of time. Yeah, you have to check online there, because mostly not, because this is one of the popular museums nowadays that only tolerate 70 people in at a time. So that is harder to get tickets. You really have to, you can always give it a try after 7 o'clock. Sometimes they toss in last minute tickets. So when you look to the tower now, you can see first of all that beautiful royal crown on the top. Well, that was a dedication from this Prince Maximilian that came from Austria, from the Roman Empire, and he gave Amsterdam its protection. And that meant we were a pilgrim's place, living under the Roman Empire protection. And that is why we carry that crown. Look underneath the clock. You just look so small from the front. It had to do with our Amsterdam tax system. People living here had to pay taxes for building their houses, not by the size of the house or the whole plot. They paid taxes on the width of their houses. So the smaller you built, the less taxes you were paying. And if you had a plot that carried on, you were allowed to build it for 2/3 maximum on one plot. So some houses are very small from the front, but go through very far out. Like a shotgun house, more or less, the same idea, and it had to do with the taxes. So when we enlarged them, we had a problem, because how could you ever reach the new setup levels of apartments that were built on top of it? The only possible way was building an extra staircase complex. And as we practically hardly already had any space, these were built in as small and narrow as possible, and they go up pretty steep. So that means when we move apartments nowadays, no way Jose were able to use the staircase, bringing up our furniture. So you still see the furniture hoisted through the windows inside the different levels of apartments. There's no other way of bringing your furniture in, unless what most people do here in Amsterdam, and we are smart shoppers, we buy our furniture at IKEA. We buy it in a box, and once we have it indoors, we set it out as furniture, right? That's the only practical way in there. And people had a lot of staff working for them. And think about Downtown Abbey, or like upstairs, downstairs, when they had the servants partly living with them in their houses. And that's here, you see that on the right. You see, underneath the main door, there is another door that brings you into the basement kitchen area. That was the entrance for bringing the products straight into the basement kitchen area, but also functionable for the staff. So they didn't have to go to the main entrance door on a daily basis. They entered into the houses and they moved their way through these hidden flight staircases that were hidden behind these thick-sized walls of these houses. We had another tax system. Next to the fact people were paying tax to live within the protecting enclosed city walls of Amsterdam, and they pay tax to live here, they pay tax by the width of their houses, but we had another tax system. Any idea what that was? Look at the windows. It was window taxes. Glass was something expensive. So they paid, the more bigger sized windows, the more taxes they were paying. So look to the house here of the mayor, where we see the Amsterdam coats of arms flags, so red, black and white, with the free Andreas access, the coats of arms. On the first floor, this is where the mayor of Amsterdam is located. It's the first time in history, though, that we have a female mayor. And first everybody, well, at least the ladies then, they were, hey, father, huh? But now we're not so. Can she hear me? No. We had a very beloved mayor, but unfortunately he passed away. And ever since, a lot of changements have been moved into the city, and not always for the benefit of the tourists.